Well, we're continuing with our sermon series called A Firm Foundation. And remember, we're talking about this idea that our covenant with God, our covenant relationship with God, is the only firm foundation that we could possibly build our lives on. And the problem that we have in our culture is there's all kinds of gurus and everything else that will try to help you build your life. But unless you get the foundation right, then everything else will be for nothing. And so this is a really important thing that we talk about. And today we're talking about the fact that our covenant relationship with God is a firm foundation for having resilient joy in your life. And so we're going to be in Jeremiah chapter 32 today. If you have your device or your Bible handy, you can look that up if you want to follow along with us. But we're going to be talking about a few things today. We're going to be talking about, first of all, how our covenant relationship with God leads to joy. We're going to talk about the idea of value and joy. What part does it play? And finally, we're going to talk about obedience and joy, because I find that that's one of the things that's difficult for us to kind of figure out. So let's turn to Jeremiah chapter 32, and we'll get started here. And it says that in verse 38, it says, "And they shall be my people, and I will be their God." Now, this is an important statement because this is a statement of covenant between God and His people. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. In any kind of covenant, what happens is two things are brought together and they're made into one. There's something new that's created. As two things have their identities formed by the union with each other. They shall be my people, and I will be their God. So God is going to be now the God of His people, the Israelites, and the people are going to be known by the fact that God is their God. Verse 39 says, "I will give them one heart and one way, that they may fear me forever for their own good and the good of their children after them. I will make with them an everlasting covenant, that I will not turn away from doing good to them. And I will put the fear of me in their hearts, that they may not turn from me. I will rejoice in doing them good, and I will plant them in this land in faithfulness with all my heart and all my soul." Now, think about that passage for a second and just how profoundly fantastic that is. Think about that this is God, the creator of the universe. He's saying, they're going to be my people. I'm going to be their God. There's going to be a connection between us. And you think, well, okay, there's a connection between them, but how strong is this connection? How pervasive, how complete is this connection? First of all, it's going to be an everlasting covenant. And secondly, he says in verse 40, "I will not turn away from doing good to them." That what a great thing to be promised by God, right? I mean, think about that for a second, to be promised by God. Imagine if God came to you, like tonight in a vision, God comes to you and He says, "I am not going to turn away from doing you good." I mean, it's great when anybody says that to us, right? I'm not going to turn away from doing you good. But the thing is that there's desire and then there's capacity, right? God has the capacity to do us good, greater than anything that we've ever known. There's nobody in your life that can promise to do you good. Imagine if the President of the United States came to you and said, "I am going to do you good and I'm not going to turn away from that." I mean, that's better than it's better than like the random checkout cashier at the store or something like that. I mean, that would be great if the cashier at the store said, "I'm not going to turn away from doing you good." I mean, that's good. But it's probably better for the president to say that. But imagine this is the God of the universe, the creator of all things, and He's saying, "I'm not going to turn away from doing you good. And I will put the fear of me in their hearts." And that's, oh, wait a second. What happened there? We were talking about good. He was going to do us good forever. He was promising to do us good forever. And then He says, "I'm going to put the fear of me in your hearts." And you think, wait a second. All of a sudden, this got really strange. But then look, there's a reason for that. That they may not turn from me. God's going to put the fear of Him in your heart so that you don't turn from Him. Because the thing is, even when the God of the universe comes and promises to do everlasting good to you, the thing is, because of who we are, because we're sinful people, there's a tendency that we have to turn away from that. How amazing is that in just its kind of stupidity? And yet that's where our hearts are. And he says, no, but I'm going to change their heart. I'm going to put a fear of me in their hearts that they may not turn from me. And then maybe the most profound verse in this passage that we read, I will rejoice in doing them good. I will rejoice. Do you think about that? Do you think about God rejoicing in doing you good? Not only does God do you good, but He rejoices in doing you good. I will rejoice in doing them good, and I will plant them in this land in faithfulness with all my heart and all my soul. When Jesus talks about what's the greatest commandment, what is the greatest commandment? To love the Lord your God with what? All your heart and mind and soul and strength? Why? You're committing all your heart, mind, soul, strength, all of that to God. Why? Because look, God rejoices in doing us good, planting us with faithfulness, with all of His heart and with all of His soul. Now, I understand that this promise was made to Israel, but they're true for us in Christ. So let's talk about what a covenant has to do with joy. Okay, because I think this is really important to understand. We have a mistaken idea of where joy comes from, and we need to dispel that. So let's talk about the first point here, covenants and joy. So why is it that we need to find joy in covenants, or why is it that covenant is the thing that brings us joy? Well, the reality is that we are finite creatures. We're not infinite. We're not like God. We're not self-sustaining. We're not complete in and of ourselves. We need something from outside of us to come into us and give us life. Now, I know that there are people who claim to be breatharians. You guys heard of, there's vegetarians and then there's breatharians. The people who say that they get all the nutrients they need from breathing the air. They don't need to eat anything. And the thing is that I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical. I won't say it's out and out not true, but I'm skeptical. But even if it is true, they still need the air from outside of them. They're still getting life from outside of them, right? The reality is that all of us are not sufficient in and of ourselves. We need life from outside of us. And in the garden, God created a physical world for mankind to live in with these trees that produce fruit, and those were the mediators of physical life to us, the thing that we took in from outside of ourselves to give us life. But spiritually, we also need to take in things from outside of us for our life. And these things then need to be incorporated into us. There needs to be a unity between us and it. Right? And that's what happens when you eat. You eat food, and it's unified with your body. It becomes your body, and then you have life from that. Well, that's the reality of the situation. How many of you experience joy from eating? Anyone? Anyone experience joy from eating? I know some people do and some people don't. It's weird to me that there can be people who don't. It's weird to me. If you're one of those people who don't, I find you strange. It's not a bad thing. I just don't understand it, because I find joy in eating. I know, looking at me, that's probably like you never would have guessed it. But the reality is I find joy in eating. I find eating to be a joyful thing. But the idea here is that when we gain life, the emotion that's appropriate to that is joy. When you gain life, it's joyful, isn't it? And so the idea here is important, that our joy comes through covenant. Our joy comes from taking things from the outside of us and uniting with those things and finding life from doing that. And there's a million different ways that we do that. But proper covenanting is the foundation for joy. Joy is the happiness that we find in life. It's a positive emotion that results from proper covenanting, from proper taking things in from the outside and finding life and finding growth from those things. And the reality is here that's really important is that true joy is not fragile. We'll talk about more about that in a moment. But true joy is not fragile, because when I say it's an emotion or something like that, I think that sometimes we can think, well, okay, that seems fragile to me. But the reality is that it's not fragile. But here's the problem. Notice I said proper covenanting is the foundation of joy, because there's also improper covenanting. This is like you can eat food and it will combine with your body and bring you life and you find joy from that. You can also eat poison, and when you covenant with poison, it doesn't bring you life, it brings you death. And so the reality here is that we have to covenant with the right things. That's why in the Garden of Eden, there was a tree that Adam and Eve were not to eat from. Because covenanting with some things brings death. And the reality is that in our lives, we understand this to be true. In Deuteronomy chapter 26, verse 9 through 11, it says, "And he brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And behold, now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground, which you, O Lord, have given me. And you shall set it down before the Lord your God and worship before the Lord your God. And you shall rejoice in all the good that the Lord your God has given to you and to your house, you and the Levite and the sojourner who is among you." The reality here is that when we covenant with things, and that happens in a way that produces life for us, that joy is the result. Did you catch that? Joy is the result. Even though God is calling the people of Israel, even though He's calling them to bring a sacrifice, they're called to give something up in this process. The result of God providing them this land and these crops and this abundance that brings them life, the result of their covenant relationship with God manifesting itself in the world around them, is that joy should be the result. It's a joyful thing. But the reality is also that if you covenant with the wrong thing, that death, bitterness, and rejection are what happens. And the reality here is that when we look at our lives, sometimes we find a lack of joy, and always in that there is a lack of proper covenanting. If you watch any kind of Disney or Pixar movies, you have a picture of a bitter old man, right, in some of their movies. Have you guys noticed? There's some of their movies, I remember there was a couple of different movies that I'm kind of vaguely thinking about that maybe are associated with them, maybe not, I don't know. It's all very unclear in my mind, but go with it. You have a picture of like an old man, and you have a picture of say, like a broken down house. It's always broken down. It's scary, right? And what happens is that the old man is the kind of the mean guy on the street, and he's the get off my lawn guy, and then through the process of the story, he comes into contact with somebody, and he immediately tries to push them away, but because circumstances or whatever, he can't. And then pretty soon over the course of the movie, what happens is he becomes attached to that person through a covenant, and he experiences joy. Is this ringing any bells? In fact, I was thinking of the one specific movie that I can remember that's like this is not Disney or Pixar. It's actually the movie Gran Torino. Do you guys remember that movie? A little bit different than Disney and Pixar. We're going a whole different way now. Gran Torino, you guys remember that movie? You have Clint Eastwood, and he's the perfect get off my lawn guy. Because I can imagine him, phoning in a pizza order, and it would sound like a threat. You know what I'm saying? Give me a pepperoni. He just has that gravelly, like menacing voice. And there's a point in the movie where things are happening. He's in a neighborhood. He doesn't like who's moved in and stuff. And he's in this neighborhood, and at one point people are doing something, and he comes out with a rifle, and he knocks one of them down. And he points the rifle at him, and what does he say? Get off my lawn, right? And the thing is that he doesn't like these people, but what happens is he takes this kid from next door who doesn't have a father under his wing, to the point where that kid's future is so important to him that he sacrifices his life for that kid. The thing that to kind of think about is notice the unhappiness versus the happiness. Notice where the joy comes. There's this defensive, stay away from me, I'm not going to let you in. And then there's over time, there's a letting of that person in and a covenanting with them, a union with them. And that union brings joy to the point where it's so valuable that giving up a life is not out of the question. And the question is, well, how do you get to be that old man who's bitter? And the reason that we get like this is because we've covenanted with the wrong things and we've been hurt by them. And the reality is that all of us have that in our past, don't we? Can't all of us think of something or some time or someone that we've covenanted with and it's hurt us? It's wounded us deeply, and sometimes it's a short, sharp wound. You know, we end up with PTSD when that happens. There's a short, sharp wound. It's so severe, it's so bad. Maybe it doesn't last for very long, but it's so severe and so bad that it changes our life forever. I was watching a documentary about this bus kidnapping that happened in the 70s in California. And what happened was these three guys, young guys, decided to kidnap a whole bus full of kids and hold them for ransom. And they put them in a trailer that was buried under the ground where it was completely dark. They hijacked this bus. They took these kids and they put them underground. And these kids were not having any of it. And they actually broke out and dug their way up out of the ground and escaped. But when you talk, in this documentary, they were talking to some of these adults because this happened back in the 70s, and they were talking about, a lot of them, how it changed the course of their life forever. Because those wounds can be so deep and so traumatic and so severe that we block ourselves off. But in blocking ourselves off, we're blocking ourselves off from life. Sometimes it's not something short and severe, but it's something that's subtle and goes on for years and years and years. Some of us grew up in a situation where the families that we were covenanted in were families that weren't good for us. And they created such deep and persistent wounds that now we block ourselves off from the world and we say, I'm not going here. I'm staying away. Sometimes what's happened is neither of those things happen, but our own life choices, the sinful choices that we've made in covenanting with things that weren't good for us, have closed us off. Where covenanting should bring us joy, the idea of it terrifies us, and we become bitter, we become distant, we become resentful. So covenants should bring us joy. In fact, they're the only place where joy can be found. And yet, a lot of times we find ourselves not able to enter into covenants because of our past trauma. And that's certainly a sad situation, and one that God addresses in our life. So secondly, how do we see the connection between value and joy? We know that joy comes from covenants. It comes from taking things outside of ourselves, incorporating it into ourselves, and finding life and joy in that. But what does value have to do with this? Well, here's the thing that's really important to understand, is that covenanting is an expression of value. Covenanting is an expression of value. And that's always the way that it works. It can't work any other way, and we know this, and this is why covenanting brings us joy. And this is why ultimately anything that is material cannot bring you joy for very long. And the reason for this is very simple, and that is that covenanting is always an expression of value, and valuing implies a valuer. The thing is, if there is no God, then there is no ultimate value of anything. Because value requires a valuer. There is no way to have value without a valuer. The subjective experience of life is as real as anything else. And the reality here, we know this because we understand that in covenanting, we're always assessing or assigning value to things. And that's why ultimately there's danger involved in giving ourselves away in covenant. Because here's the thing, when you covenant with something, you have to give yourself. And there's no greater price you can pay. When God says to the people of Israel, when He says, I will be your God, this is an everlasting covenant, God is giving Himself to Israel. And if Israel takes on God as their God, they're giving themselves to God. It's like a marriage. There's no way to stay safe in a marriage. We know this, right? And it's something that either you didn't know, but then when you got married, you found out. Surprise. Or it's something that you knew, and so when you went to get married, there was a little bit of seriousness there, right? There's a little bit of, hey, what am I getting myself in? If you know what's going on, you know that when you give yourself in a covenant, you're giving yourself. There's nothing greater that you can give. And so you're assigning value to this thing. You're worth me giving myself to. When you give yourself to the wrong thing, the problem is they don't give back. And that's the problem that we have in covenanting. You guys remember being a kid? Anyone here remember that? Vaguely? You have vague notions at all? I know for some of us it was a long time ago. Try to undo the cobwebs, creep back in your mind. Do you remember being a kid and being like, hey, do you like me? Yes, no. Right? And you sent that. And maybe if you were really smart, you just put, do you like, and you put your name so they wouldn't know it was from you. And you passed it through 34 people so that they had no, and then they put the check mark. Why did you do that? Because there's this problem in covenanting, right? If you say, I'm seeing you as valuable, then what happens if the person says, nope? What happens? It's not easy, is it? And the reality here is important for us to understand that when we covenant, we're assigning value to something. We're giving value. We're giving of ourselves. We're valuing that. And if that's not responded to in kind, then we're left poor for it. We're being robbed. In our modern culture, this happens all over the place. And in fact, one of the ways we can see it most clearly is in the hookup culture, where sometimes people give all of themselves and get nothing in return. And the result of that is always an emptying out of their own self-worth and their own value, to be left poor, to be left hurt. And anything that's covenantal, the Bible's advice to us is to be equally yoked, to value something that values you in return. And if you notice in this passage something really interesting, that God wants the people their hearts to stay with Him because His heart is with them. Do you see that? God says, I'm going to give you a fear so that your heart doesn't leave me. Why? Because they have all of His heart and all of His soul. Why is God a jealous God? Why does God want you ultimately covenanting with Him above anything else? Because God loves you and He knows that there is nothing else that you can covenant with that will value you the way that He values you. That when you give your heart to Him, it's safe because He will give you all of His heart. And if you give your heart fully to anything else, it will never be returned to you in the same condition you lent it out. Having something of value brings us joy, doesn't it? Think about that. Having something of value brings us joy. And you can think of things that are small. You can think of things like clothing, having a nice, if you ever go out and get a nice pair of clothes and you put it on, you feel good about yourself, right? I remember as a kid, I would get a new pair of shoes and I'd be so excited. And the first thing that would happen is I'd go in and say, hey, I have new shoes. And some kid would step on them. You guys remember that? Those kids. But the reality is that goes up from there, because if you have a house that's nice, that's even better than nice clothes. But the thing is that when you have relationships that are valuable, that's even nicer than that. And the reality is that when we have something of value, it brings us joy. But value necessitates a valuer. And here's the problem that we experience in life is you cannot keep yourself safe and have joy from having something of value. You can't keep yourself safe in this. You cannot. You say, I want to have something of value in my life. Okay, well then you need to value it. You know what that means? It means you need to give yourself to it. Well, I want to stay safe. Well, then you'll not have anything of value in your life. Think about the cartoon I talked about with the old man. What is he? He's alone. Why is he alone? Because he needs to feel safe. And because he needs to feel safe, he can't give himself to anything. And because he can't give himself to anything, he can't have anything of value in his life. And because he can't have anything of value in his life, he's bitter and he's old and he's angry. We have to have something of value in our lives. We have to covenant with something of value. We have to give our lives to something that is going to return to us that same valuing. The reality is that without sacrifice, you can't have joy. In fact, in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verses 10 through 12, it says this. It says, "But when you go over the Jordan and you live in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and when He gives you rest from all your enemies around so that you live in safety, then to that place the Lord your God will choose to make His name dwell there. There you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your tithes and the contributions that you present, all your finest vow offerings that you vow to the Lord. And you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male servants and your female servants, and the Levite that is within your towns, since he has no portion or inheritance with you." What is God saying here? He's saying, look, I'm going to create this place where I'm going to be, and when I do that, you've got to bring all your sacrifices and all your offerings in, and then when you do that, you need to rejoice. And that sounds so strange to us, because who wants to give up a bunch of stuff? Who's going to be happy about that? Bring all your stuff to me and then be happy about it. Why should you be happy about it? Because you have something of value. You have something worthwhile. And in order to have something of value that's worthwhile, you need to give yourself to it. And in doing so, you're going to find joy. Because why? Because I'm going to be as committed to you as you are to me. You're going to have value in my eyes just like I have value in yours. Sacrifice is not an impediment to joy. It is a condition of joy. And that's why joy is not weak and joy is not fragile. Because there is no joy without giving yourself and giving all of yourself. And when you find yourself in a relationship with God, it doesn't matter how much you're called on to give, because you will never outgive the value that God is giving into your life. It's not possible for you to do it. And so if it requires everything, you can still have joy. Read the New Testament. Read the Old Testament. At every turn, people are called on to give up everything, including their lives. And so often they do so with joy. Why? Because they understand this, that I can give all of myself to God and come out a winner. There is no sacrifice that I can be called on that's an impediment to my joy. And that's why when people tried to, in the New Testament times, tried to stamp out the church through all kinds of persecution, they couldn't do it. Why? Because the joy just increased. So does what you have, does what you're giving yourself to give back to you? You can value the wrong things or you can value the right things too much. Do they give back to you? And the reality is that God has withheld nothing of Himself from us in Jesus Christ, and therefore He is worthy of everything that we have. If you find yourself in fear of covenanting, then you've probably given yourself to the wrong things, or you have given too much to the right things. And because of that, you're now afraid to covenant, you're closed off, you have fear, you're perhaps bitter or defensive, or maybe something else. You see no value in yourself. When we have been robbed of all of our self-worth, we will not think of engaging in a covenant because we will think that we have nothing to offer. But I can tell you this, that there is healing from God. If you give everything to God, He will give back to you so much more than you've put in. There is no outgiving God. There is no way that you can give more. If you give everything, the more that you give, the more that you will receive back from Him. And if you give every single thing in your life, you will find that you are not impoverished, but you are enriched. Well, finally, let's talk about obedience and joy. Because here's the place where we most need to pay attention. Why does God give us commands? Why does God do that? Why does God give us commands? Because I think that when you see things like, you see this all the time in our culture, people saying, well, I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. What generally they want is they want the feelings of love and value from having a God in the world. They want the feelings of meaning from that. But what they're trying to avoid is the rules that they think are the bane of all organized religions, right? If I am spiritual, I don't really have any rules. I just get this love and all that kind of stuff. But if I have a religion, then I miss out on the love and all I have is rules. And so I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And here's the problem. That's just not right. It just doesn't work that way. Why does God give us commands? Because He loves us. Because He wants to give Himself to us. Because He values us. All of those things are true, and they're found in His commands. God gives Himself to us in His commands. Have you guys noticed that if you look through the Ten Commandments, they're not random? Has anybody noticed that? There's not a random. God didn't roll the dice and find, here's a rule that sounds good. They're not random at all. In fact, a lot of theologians have pointed out for a long, long time that the commands of God have to do with His character and His nature. Like God says, do not lie. Why? Because He's truth. God says, be faithful. Why? Because He's faithful. If you look through the commands, they're all a picture of His character. And so what God is giving us in His commands is He's giving us a portion of Himself. He loves us enough to do that. God's commands are this great reflection of His character. In Deuteronomy chapter 6, verse 1 through 6, it says, now this is the commandment, the statutes and the rules that the Lord your God commanded me to teach you, that you may do them in the land which you are going to possess it. So He's saying these are the commandments, the statutes, and the rules. And automatically the people said, let's rejoice, right? God's giving us a bunch of commandments. Let's rejoice. Let's have a party. Let's have a God's commands, rules, and statutes party. And He continues on in verse 2 of Deuteronomy chapter 6, that you may fear the Lord your God, you and your son's son, by keeping all His statutes and His commandments, which I commanded you all the days of your life, that your days may be long. Hear therefore, O Israel, and be careful to do them, that it may go well with you, and that you may multiply greatly, as the Lord, the God of your fathers, has promised you in a land flowing with milk and honey. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. Did you notice why God is giving the commands? He tells us. It says that your days may be long, at the end of verse 2, that your days may be long. That it may go well with you, verse 3. That you may multiply greatly in a land that God promised you, flowing with milk and honey. God is giving you these commands because He wants it to go well with you. Notice that He says in verse 40 of Jeremiah chapter 32, the passage that we started with. If we go all the way back to that passage we started with, in verse 40 it says, I will make with them an everlasting covenant, that I will not turn away from doing them good, and I will put fear of me into their hearts, that they may not turn from me. I will rejoice in doing them good. I will plant them in this land in faithfulness with all my heart and with all my soul. Do you see that His intention is given there, and that in Deuteronomy chapter 6, that intention is fulfilled in giving them this law? God wants us to follow His commands because He loves us. And that love is found in these commands. Well, think about it this way. God gave the command to Adam and Eve not to eat the tree in the garden. You guys remember that? He says, hey, you can eat all these trees, but don't eat the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. You can't do that. Why did God give them that command? Because He loved them, and He knew that if they covenanted with that tree in that way, that would not be life to them, but be poison to them. Do you understand that God's commands to you, this is so important, God's commands to you are to keep you from covenanting with the wrong things in the wrong way. That these covenants to you will be poison to you or poison to the other person. And so God basically says, look, here's the deal. I love you so much. I want to give myself to you. And life is being like me, and not being like me is covenanting with the wrong things. And so to help you to not covenant with the wrong things, I want to give you these commands. So obey Him with joy. Obey Him with joy. Because what He's trying to do is He's trying to give you all of Himself. He's trying to give you every good thing in its good way, and trying to keep you from every bad thing in its bad way. Here's the reality that I've found in my life. Every joyful person that I've ever known is opening to covenant in the world. They're just open to covenanting with the world. They go out in the world and they're open. They go out in the world and they see the world and they think, I want to covenant with this world. I have never known a truly joyful person that's closed off, that looks at the world and fears, that looks at the world and says, I'm afraid. I'm afraid of this going to happen. I'm afraid that's going to happen. I'm afraid of this. I'm afraid of that. And they close themselves. I've never known somebody who does that and is sitting in their house, blocked off from the world, and says, now I'm happy. Now I'm joyful. I've never seen that. But I've also seen a lot of people that are too open to covenanting with the world. And they start off very joyful in their life, and they say, yippee, look at this life. Everything's great. Everything's wonderful. I love everything. I love everyone. I will covenant with everyone and everything. And then over time, what happens is they get hurt, they get used, and they become bitter, and their life is not what they wanted it to be. My encouragement to you is to understand that your covenant with God is the foundation for a resilient joy in your life. And it is the only foundation for a resilient joy in your life. Because it is the only thing that will give you the confidence to go out in the world and to bring in life from outside. To be open to people and to things and to relationships and to work and to all these things that can bring us great joy in our life. It is the only thing that provides a firm foundation for that, because it will make you open to all the right things, and it will make you incredibly careful of all the wrong things. It will keep you from being emptied and being hurt by covenanting with the wrong things, while allowing you to be open, to be gracious, and to be generous with the part of the world that will give you a return because it's manifesting God to you. There is in life all these opportunities that come by us. They come to us, they appear to us, and we're made to choose. And if we choose in fear, we will almost always make the wrong choice. But if we have the confidence of God, and we are well-founded in Him, and in our covenant relationship with Him, we can withstand any storm. We will make the right decisions. We will find ourselves buoyed by the joy of having the right covenants. There is so much that God wants to give us, so much. Don't be closed off to it, but have confidence in Him.
Thanks for joining our worship service today. Please follow us on our Facebook page where you can let us know about any needs or prayer requests you may have and keep up with the latest church news and events. You can also check out our past lessons and other videos by visiting our YouTube channel. At First Christian, we strive to be the presence of Christ in the world by helping others to believe in God's love for them, to belong to His church, and to become like Christ in their lives. If you would like to support us in our ministry, you may do so by giving online through our website at fcct.org or by mailing checks to the church. Hey, have a great week.